Tommy Martinez was 25 years old and thought he was the king of the world. He had just finished his third beer at a pub near Buckingham Palace, and his friends were daring him to do something crazy. Tommy loved attention more than anything else in life. He was the type of guy who would do anything to make people laugh, even if it meant getting into trouble. "Come on, Tommy," his friend Dave shouted over the loud music. "You said you weren't afraid of anything. Prove it." The group had been drinking for hours, celebrating Tommy's new job at a construction company. They were tourists from Manchester visiting London for the weekend, and Tommy wanted to show off to his friends. Tommy had always been the troublemaker in his group. Back home, he was known for playing pranks on people and causing scenes in public places. His friends thought it was funny, but Tommy's behavior had gotten worse over the years. He had been kicked out of several pubs and even spent a night in jail for fighting. But Tommy never learned his lesson. The group stumbled out of the pub and walked toward Buckingham Palace. The sun was setting, and the famous red-uniformed guards were still standing at their posts. Tommy looked at them and got an idea that would change his life forever. "Watch this, guys," he said with a big grin on his face. "I'm going to mess with one of those toy soldiers." His friends tried to stop him. "Tommy, don't be stupid," said his friend Mark. "Those are real soldiers, not actors. You could get in serious trouble." But Tommy was already walking toward the palace gates. He had drunk too much to think clearly, and the alcohol made him feel brave and stupid at the same time. Standing at his post was Sergeant James Wilson, a soldier who had served in the British Army for 12 years. He had fought in Afghanistan and Iraq, where he had seen things that most people could never imagine. James was a decorated soldier who had saved lives and earned medals for his bravery. Now he was serving as one of the Queen's Guards, a position that required perfect discipline and control. James had noticed the drunk group approaching, but he remained perfectly still. His job was to stand guard and not react to anything unless there was a real threat. He had dealt with rude tourists before, people who tried to make him laugh, took selfies too close to him, or shouted in his face. Ow! But James never moved. His training had taught him to stay focused no matter what happened around him. Tommy walked up to the guard and started making jokes. "Hey there, pretty boy in the funny hat," he said loudly. "Are you real, or are you just a statue?" The guard didn't move or speak. This made Tommy even more excited. He loved having an audience, and other tourists were starting to watch what was happening. "Look at this guy," Tommy shouted to his friends. "He's like a robot. I bet I can make him move." Tommy started dancing around the guard, making faces and waving his hands. James remained perfectly still, his eyes looking straight ahead. His red uniform was perfect, his black boots shined, and his tall black hat sat exactly right on his head. Other tourists were getting uncomfortable. Some parents pulled their children away from the scene. They could see that Tommy was drunk and acting inappropriately. An elderly woman tried to tell Tommy to leave the guard alone, but he ignored her. "Mind your own business, Grandma," he said rudely. Tommy's friends were getting worried. They could see police officers in the distance, and they knew Tommy was about to cross a line. "Tommy, come on, let's go," Dave called out. "You've had your fun. Let's get out of here before you get arrested." But Tommy was enjoying the attention too much to stop. The drunk man got closer to Sergeant Wilson. He could smell the alcohol on Tommy's breath and see the wild look in his eyes. James had seen this type of person before, someone who thought that rules didn't apply to them, someone who had no respect for authority or tradition. But James remained calm and professional. Tommy decided to take things further. He had been showing off for 10 minutes, and the guards still hadn't moved. "This guy is boring," he said to the crowd that had gathered. "Let me see if this will wake him up." Without any warning, Tommy pulled back his right leg and kicked Sergeant Wilson hard in the shin. The kick was solid and painful. James felt the impact through his thick uniform. But what hurt more was the disrespect. This wasn't just an attack on him personally. It was an attack on everything he represented. The uniform he wore, the Queen he served, and all the soldiers who had died. Protecting their country, Tommy started laughing immediately after the kick. He thought it was hilarious that he had actually kicked a Queen's Guard. "Did you see that?" he shouted to his friends. I kicked him and he didn't even move. These guys are useless." Tommy was laughing so hard that tears were coming out of his eyes. But his laughter didn't last long. What Tommy didn't know was that Queen's Guards are highly trained soldiers, not just ceremonial decorations. They are allowed to defend themselves if they are attacked. And Sergeant Wilson had just been assaulted by a drunk tourist who thought it was funny to attack a member of the British military. James had two choices. He could continue to stand still and let Tommy get away with assaulting him, or he could defend himself as his training and the law allowed him to do. The decision was easy. No one was allowed to attack the Queen's Guard and walk away laughing about it. In one swift motion that took less than 2 seconds, Sergeant Wilson stepped forward and delivered a perfect right hook to Tommy's jaw. The punch was precise, powerful, and completely legal. James had been trained in hand-to-hand combat, and he knew exactly how to defend himself without using excessive force. Tommy never saw the punch coming. 1 second he was laughing about kicking the guard, and the next second he was flat on his back on the ground, seeing stars and feeling like his head had been hit by a truck. The world was spinning around him, and he couldn't understand what had just happened. The crowd around Buckingham Palace went completely silent. Everyone had seen Tommy kick the guard and laugh about it, but nobody expected what happened next. One moment Tommy was standing and laughing, and the next moment he was lying flat on his back on the cold stone ground. Holding his jaw and groaning in pain, Sergeant Wilson had returned to his original position as if nothing had happened. He stood perfectly straight, looking ahead, his face showing no emotion at all. The only sign that anything had occurred was Tommy, lying on the ground a few feet away, rolling around and moaning like a wounded animal. Tommy's friends rushed over to help him. His jaw was already starting to swell, and he was having trouble speaking clearly. What happened? He mumbled through his damaged mouth. His friends looked at him like he was the stupidest person on earth. "You got punched, you idiot, Dave." Said, "What did you think would happen when you kicked a soldier?" The tourists who had watched the whole thing started talking excitedly. Most of them were happy to see Tommy get what he deserved. "That drunk fool got exactly what was coming to him," said an older man from Germany. "You don't attack soldiers and expect nothing to happen." Other people were taking pictures and videos with their phones, capturing Tommy's embarrassing moment. Tommy slowly sat up, still feeling dizzy and confused. His jaw hurt terribly, and he could taste blood in his mouth. He looked up at Sergeant Wilson, who was standing in the exact same position as before, as if he had never moved at all. Tommy couldn't believe that the guard had actually hit him. "Back, he can't do that," Tommy shouted angrily, though his words were slurred because of his swollen jaw. "That's assault. I'm going to sue him." The crowd around him started laughing. They couldn't believe that Tommy was still acting like the victim after he had kicked the guard. First, a police officer who had been watching from nearby walked over to the scene. Constable Sarah Roberts had been patrolling the palace area for 5 years, and she had seen many incidents like this one. She knew exactly what had happened because she had watched the whole thing from the beginning. "Sir, you need to come with me," Constable Roberts said to Tommy. "You're under arrest for assaulting a member of Her Majesty's forces." Tommy couldn't believe what he was hearing. "I'm under arrest. He's the one who punched me," he protested. Pointing at Sergeant Wilson, the police officer explained the law to Tommy in simple terms. "You kicked him first, sir. The guard has the right to defend himself when he's attacked. What you did is called assault, and it's a serious crime." Tommy's friends were backing away from him now, realizing that their weekend in London was about to become much more complicated. Other tourists who had seen everything started giving statements to the police officer. They all told the same story. Tommy had been drinking, acting rude, and then kicked the guard without any reason. Nobody felt sorry for him. In fact, most people thought he deserved worse than just one punch. Tommy was still sitting on the ground, holding his jaw and feeling sorry for himself. The alcohol was starting to wear off, and he was beginning to realize how much trouble he was in. "I was just having fun," he said weakly. It was just a joke, but nobody was laughing with him anymore. Constable Roberts helped Tommy to his feet and put handcuffs on him. "Assaulting a Queen's Guard is not a joke, sir," she said firmly. "These men risk their lives to serve our country, and they deserve respect, not attacks from drunk tourists." Tommy was starting to feel sick, and not just from the alcohol, as the police officer led Tommy away. Sergeant Wilson remained at his post, completely unmoved by what had happened. Other guards nearby had seen the incident, but they too remained perfectly disciplined. They'd all been trained to handle situations like this. They were proud of how their colleague had defended himself. Tommy's friends followed him as he was being arrested. They tried to convince the police officer to let him go. "He didn't mean any harm," Mark said. "He's just drunk and stupid." But Constable Roberts had heard excuses like this many times before. "Being drunk is not an excuse for assaulting a soldier," she replied. The walk to the police car was humiliating for Tommy. Dozens of tourists were watching him get arrested, and many of them were taking pictures and videos. He knew that his embarrassing moment would probably end up on social media, where everyone back home would see how stupid he had been at the police car. Tommy tried one last time to get out of trouble. "Look, officer, I'll apologize to the guard," he said. "Can't we just forget this happened?" But Constable Roberts shook her head. "It doesn't work that way, sir. You've committed a crime, and you'll have to face the consequences." As Tommy was put into the back of the police car, he looked back at Sergeant Wilson one last time. The guard was still standing perfectly still, doing his job with the same pride and professionalism he had shown before the incident. Tommy was beginning to understand that he had messed with the wrong person. The other tourists gradually went back to their sightseeing, but many of them were talking about what they had just witnessed. "That soldier showed incredible restraint," said a woman from Canada. "He could have done much worse to that drunk fool." Others agreed that Tommy had gotten off easy with just one punch. Tommy's friends were left standing outside the palace, not knowing what to do. Their fun weekend in London had turned into a disaster because of Tommy's stupid behavior. They decided to go back to their hotel and figure out how to help their friend, though they were all angry with him for ruining their trip. Inside the police car, Tommy was finally starting to understand the seriousness of his situation. His jaw hurt, his head was pounding, and he was facing criminal charges in a foreign country. The punch from Sergeant Wilson had knocked some sense into him. It might have been too late. As the police car drove away from Buckingham Palace, Tommy realized that his few seconds of stupid behavior had changed everything. He had thought it would be funny to kick a guard, but now he was facing the possibility of jail time, fines, and a criminal record. The punch that had knocked him to the ground had also knocked him back to reality. The last thing Tommy saw as they drove away was Sergeant Wilson, still standing proudly at his post, protecting the palace and serving his queen with honor and dignity. Tommy finally understood that he had attacked not just a man, but a symbol of everything good about military service and dedication to duty. The police station was nothing like the movies Tommy had watched growing up. It was a cold, sterile place with bright fluorescent lights that made his hangover even worse. His jaw was throbbing with pain, and every time he tried to speak, it felt like someone was stabbing him with a knife. The reality of his situation was finally starting to sink in. Inspector Michael Thompson had been dealing with tourists who caused trouble around the royal palaces for over 15 years. He had seen everything from people trying to climb the gates to idiots who thought it would be funny to harass the guards. But Tommy's case was different. Most troublemakers just made noise or took inappropriate photos. Tommy had actually physically attacked a soldier. Tommy was placed in a small, windowless room with just a table and 2 chairs. The walls were gray and bare, and there was a camera in the corner recording everything. He sat there for what felt like hours, nursing his swollen jaw and thinking about how his weekend had gone so terribly wrong. The alcohol had completely worn off now, and he was feeling scared and alone. When Detective Thompson finally entered the room, he carried a thick file with Tommy's name on it. He sat down across from Tommy and opened the file, revealing photographs of the incident taken by tourists and security cameras. The pictures clearly showed Tommy kicking Sergeant Wilson and then getting punched in return. "Mr. Martinez," the detective said in a serious voice, "do you understand why you're here?" Tommy nodded weakly. His jaw was so swollen that talking was difficult and painful. "I kicked the guard," he mumbled. "But he punched me back. Doesn't that make us even?" "Detective." Thompson almost laughed at Tommy's question. "Even?" "Mr. Martinez? You assaulted a member of the Queen's Guard while he was performing his official duties? That's a very serious crime in this country." The guard was defending himself, which is completely legal. "You, on the other hand, committed assault. The detective explained to Tommy that attacking a Queen's Guard was not just regular assault, because the guards represent the crown and are performing official royal duties. Attacking them carried extra penalties that Tommy could face up to 6 months in prison and a heavy fine. If he was found guilty, he would also have a criminal record that would follow him for the rest of his life. Tommy's head was spinning, not just from the punch he had received. 6 months in prison? He asked in shock. For one little kick? Detective Thompson looked at him sternly. Mr. Martinez, you attacked a decorated war veteran who was serving his country. There's nothing little about that. The detective then told Tommy about Sergeant Wilson's background. James Wilson had served 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan, where he had saved the lives of fellow soldiers and received medals for bravery under fire. He had volunteered for dangerous missions and had seen friends die while protecting British interests abroad. Now he was serving as a Queen's Guard, one of the most prestigious positions in the British military. This man has risked his life for his country, Detective Thompson continued. And you thought it would be funny to kick him because you were drunk. How do you think that makes you look? Tommy was beginning to realize that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. He had attacked a war hero because he thought it would impress his friends. Meanwhile, back at his barracks, Sergeant Wilson was being checked by a military doctor. The kick to his shin had left a bruise, but he had suffered much worse injuries. During his combat tours, what bothered him more was not the physical pain, but the disrespect that Tommy had shown to his uniform and everything it represented. Sergeant Wilson's commanding officer, Major Patricia Davies, was proud of how her immense soldier had handled the situation. You showed perfect restraint, Sergeant, she told him. You could have done much more damage to that drunk fool, but you used exactly the right amount of force to defend yourself and teach him a lesson. The major explained to Sergeant Wilson that the incident would be thoroughly investigated, but that he had acted completely within the law and military regulations. Queen's Guards have the right and the duty to defend themselves when attacked, she said. You did nothing wrong, and you should be proud of how professionally you handled a difficult situation. Word of the incident was spreading quickly through the military community. Sergeant Wilson's fellow soldiers were all supporting him and saying that Tommy deserved much worse than one punch. That tourist got off easy, said Corporal Michael Stevens. If someone had attacked one of us in Afghanistan, they would have faced much worse consequences. Back at the police station, Tommy was being allowed to make one phone call. He decided to call his girlfriend Lisa, back in Manchester. When she answered the phone, Tommy tried to explain what had happened, but his swollen jaw made it hard to speak clearly. Tommy, what are you saying? Lisa asked, confused by his slurred speech. Did you get in a fight? When Tommy finally managed to explain that he had been arrested for kicking a royal guard, Lisa was silent for a long moment. Then she exploded in anger. You did what? She screamed into the phone. Tommy, how could you be so stupid? Kicked. One of the Queen's Guards? Are you completely insane? Lisa couldn't believe that her boyfriend had done something so foolish and disrespectful. She was embarrassed to be associated with him. Tommy tried to make excuses. I was drunk, Lisa. It seemed funny at the time, but Lisa wasn't having any of it. Being drunk doesn't excuse assaulting a soldier, Tommy. These men risked their lives to serve their country. How dare you attack one of them for entertainment? The phone call ended badly, with Lisa hanging up on Tommy after telling him that she didn't want to see him again. Tommy realized that he wasn't just facing legal problems. His relationship was probably over too. And his reputation back home would be destroyed when people found out what he had done. Detective Thompson returned to the room with more bad news for Tommy. Mr. Martinez, I've been reviewing the witness statements and video evidence. We have over 20 people who saw you kick the guard and multiple videos of the incident from different angles. The evidence against you is overwhelming. The detective also informed Tommy that the story was starting to appear in British newspapers and on social media. You're becoming quite famous, Mr. Martinez, but not in a good way. People are calling you a coward who attacks soldiers for fun. Your face is going to be all over the internet as the drunk tourist who thought it would be funny to assault a war hero. Tommy felt sick to his stomach. He realized that his moment of stupid behavior was going to follow him for the rest of his life. Everyone back home would see the videos and pictures of him getting knocked down by the guard. He would be remembered as the idiot who thought it was funny to attack a British soldier. As the evening wore on, Tommy's friends came to the police station to see if they could help him. But when they heard about the charges he was facing and the evidence against him, they realized there was nothing they could do. "Tommy, you really messed up this time," Dave said sadly. "Can't fix this for you." The detective told Tommy's friends that they could go back to Manchester, but Tommy would have to stay in London until his court hearing. He would spend at least one night in jail, and possibly more, depending on what the judge decided about bail. Tommy's fun weekend had turned into a nightmare that was just beginning. Tommy's first night in jail was the worst night of his life. The cell was small, cold, and smelled terrible. The cellmate was a man named Gary, who had been arrested for stealing cars. When Gary found out why Tommy was there, he shook his head. In disgust, "You attacked one of the Queen's guards," Gary asked. "Mate, you're going to be in serious trouble. Everyone respects those soldiers." Tommy couldn't sleep because his jaw hurt so much, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sergeant Wilson's fist coming toward his face. He kept replaying the moment over and over in his mind, wishing he could go back and make a different choice. But it was too late now. The damage was done. The next morning, Tommy was taken to court for his first hearing. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious people who had heard about the incident. Tommy felt embarrassed walking into the room with his swollen, bruised face. Everyone was staring at him, and he could hear people whispering about what he had done. Judge Margaret Harrison had been on the bench for over 20 years, and she had seen many cases of tourists behaving badly. But Tommy's case made her particularly angry. She had great respect for the military and couldn't understand why anyone would attack a soldier who was serving his country. Tommy's lawyer, Mr. Robert Smith, tried to make excuses for his client. "Your Honor, Mr. Martinez was drunk and made a terrible mistake. He deeply regrets his actions and would like to apologize to the guard he attacked." But Judge Harrison wasn't impressed by the lawyer's words. "Mr. Smith," the judge said firmly, "being drunk is not an excuse for assaulting a member of Her Majesty's forces. Your client attacked a decorated war veteran who was performing his duty. This is not a mistake. This is a crime that shows complete disrespect for our military and our country." The prosecutor, Ms. Jennifer Clark, presented the evidence against Tommy. She showed the court the videos taken by tourists and the photographs of Tommy's attack on Sergeant Wilson. The evidence was overwhelming and embarrassing. Tommy could see himself on the big screen, laughing after kicking the guard, looking like a complete fool. "Your Honor," Ms. Clark said, "this was not a momentary lapse in judgment. Mr. Martinez spent several minutes harassing the guard before he attacked him. He was clearly enjoying himself and thought it was entertaining to assault a soldier. This behavior deserves serious punishment." Judge Harrison asked Tommy to stand up and explain his actions. Tommy's jaw was still swollen, making it hard to speak clearly. "Your Honor," he mumbled, "I was drunk and I made a stupid mistake. I'm sorry for what I did. I never meant to hurt anyone." But the judge wasn't satisfied with Tommy's apology. "Mr. Martinez, you kicked a war hero who was serving his country. You then laughed about it and seemed proud of what you had done. Your apology rings hollow when compared to your behavior on that day." The judge then read a statement from Sergeant Wilson. Even though he could have appeared in court, the soldier had chosen to continue his duties rather than take time off to watch Tommy's hearing. His written statement was powerful and dignified. "I have served my country in combat and in peace," the statement read. "I have faced enemy fire in dangerous situations in foreign lands. But I never expected to be attacked by a tourist while serving at Buckingham Palace. Mr. Martinez's actions were not just an assault on me personally, but an attack on the uniform I wear and the Queen, the First Serve." The statement continued, "I do not seek revenge against Mr. Martinez, but I hope that his punishment will send a message to others that military personnel deserve respect, not ridicule. We serve our country with pride, and we should not have to fear attack from the very people we protect." Judge Harrison was visibly moved by Sergeant Wilson's statement. She looked at Tommy with disgust and disappointment. "Mr. Martinez, this brave soldier shows more class and dignity in his written statement than you showed during your entire visit to our country." The judge then announced her decision about Tommy's bail. Because he was a foreign tourist with no ties to Britain, she was concerned that he might try to flee the country before his trial. However, she agreed to grant bail on the condition that Tommy surrender his passport and report to the police station every day. Tommy's bail was set at £10,000, which was more money than he had. His friends had to pool their money together and borrow from their families back home to pay the bail. Tommy realized that his stupid behavior was costing his friends money and causing problems for everyone who cared about him. Outside the courthouse, Tommy was surrounded by reporters who wanted to interview him about the incident. The questions were harsh and embarrassing. "Mr. Martinez, why did you think it was appropriate to attack a war veteran?" one reporter asked. "You have any message for Sergeant Wilson?" asked another. Tommy tried to avoid the reporters, but they followed him down the street, taking pictures and asking more questions. He realized that his face was going to be in newspapers and on television all over Britain. Everyone would know him as the foolish tourist who attacked a Queen's Guard. Meanwhile, Sergeant Wilson was back at his post at Buckingham Palace, performing his duties with the same professionalism he had always shown. Tourists who visited the palace that day were treating the guards with extra respect. Having heard about Tommy's attack, many people stopped to thank the guards for their service. Other members of the Queen's Guard were proud of how Sergeant Wilson had handled the situation. "He showed perfect restraint," said Guardsman Peter Thompson. "Could have done much more damage to that drunk fool, but he used just enough force to defend himself and teach the man a lesson." The incident was being discussed all over social media. Most people supported Sergeant Wilson and criticized Tommy for his behavior. "That guard showed incredible patience," wrote one person on Twitter. "The tourist deserved much worse than one punch." Another person posted, "These soldiers risked their lives for our freedom, and some drunk idiot thinks it's funny to attack them. Disgusting." Tommy's friends were getting ready to return to Manchester without him. They were angry and embarrassed by what he had done. "Tommy ruined our entire trip," Dave complained. "We came here to have fun, and now we're dealing with lawyers and bail money because he decided to attack a soldier." Back at his hotel room, Tommy looked at himself in the mirror. His face was bruised and swollen, and his jaw was still very painful. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the shame and regret he felt. He realized that his few seconds of stupid behavior had changed his life forever. Tommy tried to use his phone to distract himself, but everywhere he looked online, people were talking about his attack on the guard. The videos had been shared thousands of times, and the comments were brutal. People were calling him a coward, an idiot, and much worse. His moment of stupidity had made him famous in the worst possible way. As he lay in his hotel bed that night, Tommy realized that tomorrow would bring new challenges. He still had to face a full trial, where he would likely be found guilty and sentenced to jail time. His life back home in Manchester would never be the same. Everyone would know him as the man who thought it was funny to attack a British war hero. The weeks leading up to Tommy's trial were miserable. He was stuck in London, reporting to the police station every day and watching his savings disappear on hotel bills and legal fees. Every morning when he woke up, he hoped it had all been a terrible dream, but the pain in his jaw reminded him that it was all too real. His lawyer, Mr. Smith, was not optimistic about Tommy's chances. "The evidence against you is overwhelming," he explained during one of their meetings. "We have multiple videos showing you attacking the guard and dozens of witnesses who saw what happened. Our best hope is to show that you're genuinely sorry, and hope the judge is merciful." Tommy's case had become famous throughout Britain. Newspapers were calling him the cowardly tourist and the guard kicker. Television shows were discussing his case and debating whether he deserved sympathy or harsh punishment. Most people seemed to think he deserved whatever punishment he got. The worst part for Tommy was seeing how much support Sergeant Wilson was receiving. Military veterans were praising him for his restraint and professionalism. A fund had been started to show appreciation for all the Queen's Guards, and thousands of pounds had been donated. Tommy realized that his attack had actually brought people together in support of the military. Meanwhile, Tommy's life back in Manchester was falling apart. His girlfriend Lisa had broken up with him and told everyone she knew about what he had done. His employer, the The construction company that had just hired him fired him when they saw the news reports about his arrest. His landlord told him he didn't want a criminal living in his building. Tommy's parents were disappointed and embarrassed by their son's behavior. His mother cried when she saw the videos of him attacking the guard and getting punched in return. "How did I raise a son who would do such a thing?" she asked his father. They decided not to come to London for his trial because they were too ashamed to face the media attention. Dr. Sarah Williams, psychologist who specialized in alcohol-related behavior, was interviewed about Tommy's case on television. "This young man clearly has problems with alcohol and impulse control," she explained, "but that doesn't excuse his behavior. Millions of people drink alcohol without attacking soldiers. This was a choice, not an unavoidable mistake." The day of Tommy's trial finally arrived. The courthouse was packed with reporters, military supporters, and curious members of the public. Tommy walked into the courtroom with his head down, trying to avoid the cameras and angry stares from the crowd. Sergeant Wilson had finally agreed to appear in court to give his testimony, and he walked into the courtroom in his dress uniform. Everyone fell silent. He looked impressive and dignified with rows of medals on his chest representing his years of service and bravery. Tommy felt even smaller sitting next to his lawyer. The prosecutor, Ms. Clark, called several witnesses to testify about what they had seen. Tourist after tourist took the stand and described how Tommy had harassed the guard before attacking him. They all said the same thing. Tommy seemed to be enjoying himself and showed no respect for the soldier he was attacking. One witness, Mrs. Emily Roberts, an elderly woman from Wales, was particularly powerful in her testimony. "I've visited Buckingham Palace many times over the years," she said. "I've always admired the guards and the way they serve our queen with such dignity. What that young man did was disgusting. He attacked a war hero for entertainment." When it was time for Sergeant Wilson to testify, he walked to the witness stand with perfect military bearing. He looked directly at Tommy as he was sworn in, and Tommy had to look away. Couldn't meet the eyes of the man he had attacked for no reason. "Sergeant Wilson," Ms. Clark began, "please tell the court what happened on the day in question." The soldier's testimony was clear and professional. He described how Tommy had been drinking and acting inappropriately for several minutes before the attack. "The defendant seemed to think that my colleagues and I were there for his entertainment," Sergeant Wilson said. "He was laughing and making jokes about us to his friends. When he kicked me, I felt not just physical pain, but disappointment that someone would show such disrespect to the uniform and the institution we represent." The prosecutor asked Sergeant Wilson about his military background. He modestly described his 3 tours in Afghanistan, the medals he had earned, and the friends he had lost in combat. The courtroom was completely silent as he spoke about his service to his country. "He's faced enemy fire in dangerous situations," Sergeant Wilson continued, "but I never expected to be attacked by a tourist while performing ceremonial duties in my own country. The defendant's actions were not just an assault on me personally, but on every soldier who has ever worn this uniform." When it was Tommy's, lawyers turned to question Sergeant Wilson. He tried to suggest that the guard had used excessive force in defending himself. But the soldier's response was calm and devastating. "Sir, I used the minimum force necessary to defend myself and deter further attack. I could have done much more damage, but I chose restraint." Finally, it was time for Tommy to testify in his own defense. He walked slowly to the witness stand, his jaw still showing signs of the punch he had received weeks earlier. His lawyer had coached him on what to say, but Tommy knew that nothing he said could really excuse what he had done. "I was drunk," Tommy said quietly when asked to explain his actions. "I thought it would be funny. I didn't think about the consequences or how it would affect the guard. I made a terrible mistake, and I'm sorry." His apology sounded weak and hollow in the formal courtroom setting. The prosecutor was harsh in her cross-examination of Tommy. "Mr. Martinez, you spent several minutes harassing Sergeant Wilson before you attacked him. This wasn't a split-second mistake, was it? You had plenty of time to think about what you were doing." Tommy had to admit that was true. "Yes, ma'am. I was acting stupid for several minutes. I was showing off for my friends." The prosecutor then asked him about his laughter after the kick. "You seemed very pleased with yourself after attacking the guard, didn't you?" Tommy's face turned red with shame. "Yes, ma'am. I was laughing. I thought it was funny at the time, but I realize now how wrong I was. There's nothing funny about attacking someone who's serving their country. The prosecutor wasn't finished. With him, Mr. Martinez, did you know anything about Sergeant Wilson's military service when you attacked him? Did you care that he was a decorated war veteran? Tommy shook his head miserably. No, ma'am. I didn't think about any of that. Just saw him as a tourist attraction. Miss Clark's final question was devastating. So you're telling this court that you attacked a war hero? Someone who had risked his life for his country because you thought he was just there for your entertainment? Tommy could barely whisper his answer. Yes, ma'am. That's exactly what I did. The prosecutor's closing argument was powerful and emotional. She reminded the jury that Sergeant Wilson had served his country with honor and distinction, only to be attacked by a drunk tourist who thought it would be amusing. This case is not just about one man's poor judgment, she said. It's about respect for our military and the consequences of treating soldiers as entertainment. Tommy's lawyer tried his best to defend his client, arguing that he was genuinely sorry and that his drinking had impaired his judgment. But even Mr. Smith seemed to know that his arguments were weak. The evidence was too clear. Tommy's behavior had been too shocking to excuse. Judge Harrison took only 30 minutes to reach her verdict. When she returned to the courtroom, her face was stern and angry. Tommy stood up as she began to speak, his legs shaking with fear about what she was going to say. Mr. Martinez, the judge began, I have rarely seen such a clear-cut case of unprovoked assault. You attacked a decorated war veteran who was performing his duty to serve the crown. Your actions were cowardly, disrespectful, and completely inexcusable. The judge continued her harsh words. Sergeant Wilson has served this country with distinction in some of the most dangerous places on earth. He has earned medals for bravery and has risked his life to protect the freedoms that you enjoy. You thought it would be entertaining to kick him. Tommy felt like he was going to be sick as the judge announced his sentence. I sentence you to 4 months in prison, followed by 12 months of probation. You will also pay a fine of £5,000 in compensation to Sergeant Wilson. Additionally, you are banned from all royal properties for the rest of your life. The courtroom erupted in applause as the sentence was announced. Tommy's legs gave out, and he had to grab onto his lawyer's arm to keep from falling. For months in prison meant he would lose his job permanently, and probably his apartment too. His life in Manchester was over, as Tommy was led away in handcuffs. Sergeant Wilson remained dignified and professional. He didn't celebrate Tommy's sentence or show any emotion at all. He had simply wanted justice, and justice had been served. Outside the courthouse, he made a brief statement to the media. I hope that Mr. Martinez learns from this experience and becomes a better person, Sergeant Wilson said. My colleagues, and I will continue to serve with pride and honor, regardless of how we are treated by the public. We do this job because we love our country, not because we expect praise or recognition. Tommy's friends had already returned to Manchester, embarrassed and angry about what their weekend trip had cost them. His parents released a statement saying they were disappointed in their son but hoped he would learn from his mistakes. His ex-girlfriend Lisa told reporters that she was glad she had ended their relationship. The story of Tommy's attack and punishment became a cautionary tale that was shared widely on social media. People used it as an example of how alcohol and poor judgment could ruin a person's life in just a few seconds. Military organizations used the case to educate the public about the respect that service members deserved. As Tommy was processed into prison, he realized that his moment of stupidity had changed everything. He would spend the next 4 months behind bars, thinking about how different his life could have been if he had just walked away from the guard instead of attacking him. The punch that had knocked him to the ground had been nothing compared to the punishment that followed. Prison life was harder than Tommy had ever imagined. His cell was tiny and cramped, shared with a man named Derek, who had been convicted of burglary. The prison was noisy, violent, and dangerous. Tommy quickly learned to keep his head down and avoid eye contact with the other inmates, who seemed much tougher and more experienced with prison life than he was. The worst part was that everyone in prison knew why Tommy was there. The story of his attack on the Queen's Guard had been all over the news, and criminals had no respect for someone who would assault a soldier. You attacked one of our boys? Asked Big Jim, a large man covered in tattoos who controlled Tommy's cell block. That's low, even for someone like you. Tommy spent his days working in the prison laundry, washing clothes and bed sheets for 12 hours at a time. The work was hard and boring, but it gave him time to think about what he had done and how his life had gone so wrong. He wrote letters to Sergeant Wilson, apologizing for his behavior. But he never sent them because he didn't know what to say that would make any difference. Meanwhile, life continued for Sergeant Wilson at Buckingham Palace. He had returned to his duties immediately after the trial, maintaining the same professional standards he had always shown. The incident with Tommy had made him something of a celebrity within military circles. But he was uncomfortable with the attention and preferred to focus on his job. Other Queen's Guards noticed that tourists were treating them with more respect. Since Tommy's case had become famous, parents were teaching their children about the importance of honoring soldiers, and visitors to the palace were more careful about their behavior around the guards. In an unexpected way, Tommy's stupid actions had actually improved conditions for the guards. After 2 months in prison, Tommy was allowed to have visitors. His parents finally came to see him, flying to London for the first time in their lives. The visit was awkward and painful. His mother cried when she saw him in his prison uniform, and his father could barely look at him. "How did this happen, Tommy?" his mother asked through her tears. "We raised you to be better than this. How could you attack a soldier who was serving his country?" Tommy tried to explain about the drinking and the peer pressure, but his excuses sounded weak and pathetic even to himself. His father was even harder on him. "You've embarrassed our entire family," he said angrily. "Everyone back home knows what you did. Your mother can barely leave the house without someone asking her about her son, who attacked the Queen's Guard. You've brought shame on all of us, Tommy." Realized that his actions hadn't just affected his own life, they had hurt everyone who cared about him. His parents were suffering because of what he had done. There was nothing he could do to fix it while he was locked up in prison. Months passed slowly. Tommy lost weight from the poor prison food and constant stress. He tried to use the time to educate himself, reading books from the prison library and taking courses offered to inmates. He learned about military history and began to understand the sacrifices that soldiers like Sergeant Wilson had made for their country. One day, Tommy received an unexpected visitor. It was Major Patricia Davies, Sergeant Wilson's commanding officer. She sat across from him in the prison visiting room. Her military uniform crisp and intimidating. Tommy was nervous and confused about why she had come to see him. "Mr. Martinez," Major Davies began, "I'm here because Sergeant Wilson asked me to visit you. He's concerned about your welfare and wants to know if you're learning from this experience." Tommy was shocked that the guard he had attacked was worried about him. The major explained that Sergeant Wilson was a man of extraordinary character who believed in forgiveness and second chances. "He doesn't hate you for what you did," she said, "but he wants to make sure that you understand the seriousness of your actions and that you won't repeat them when you're released." "I'm so sorry for what I did," he sobbed. "I was stupid and drunk, and I didn't think about the consequences. No, sorry isn't enough, but I don't know what else to say. I've ruined my life and embarrassed my family because of a few seconds of stupidity." Major Davies listened to Tommy's apology with professional detachment. "Mr. Martinez, Sergeant Wilson is a better man than most people. He's willing to forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You'll have to live with what you did for the rest of your life. The question is whether you'll learn from it and become a better person." As Tommy's release date approached, he was terrified about returning to the real world. He had no job, no girlfriend, and probably no apartment waiting for him in Manchester. His parents had told him he could stay with them temporarily, but he knew they were still disappointed and embarrassed by his actions. On his last day in prison, Tommy's cellmate Derek gave him some advice. "Stay away from the drink, mate," he said. "That's what got you in trouble in the first place. Find something useful to do with your life and try to make up for what you did." Tommy promised himself that he would never drink alcohol again. When Tommy walked out of prison, there were no friends or family waiting for him. The media attention had died down, but he knew that the internet never forgot. His attack on Sergeant Wilson would follow him forever. Videos of the incident were still online, and anyone who searched his name would find the story of his stupidity. Tommy returned to Manchester to find that his old life no longer existed. His apartment had been rented to someone else, his job was gone, and most of his friends wanted nothing to do with him. He moved back in with his parents, sleeping in his childhood bedroom at age 25. Trying to figure out what to do with the rest of his life, he found a job working at a warehouse, loading trucks and moving boxes. The pay was terrible, and the work was hard, but it was honest work, and nobody there cared about his past. Tommy worked long hours and kept to himself, trying to rebuild his life one day at a time. Months later, Tommy read in a newspaper that Sergeant Wilson had been promoted and was now training new recruits. The article mentioned his professionalism. During a recent incident with a disruptive tourist but didn't use Tommy's name, Tommy was grateful that the soldier was moving forward. With his career and not being defined by their encounter, Tommy never forgot the lesson he had learned from his few seconds of stupidity. He became a quiet, hard-working man who treated everyone with respect, especially anyone in uniform. He volunteered at a veterans center on weekends, helping former soldiers with job searches and housing applications. It was his way of trying to make up for what he had done. The punch that Sergeant Wilson had delivered to Tommy's jaw had healed within a few weeks, but the impact on Tommy's life lasted forever. He learned that actions have consequences, that respect must be earned, and that a moment of poor judgment can change everything. He never drank alcohol again, and he never forgot the price he paid for thinking it would be funny to kick a Queen's Guard. Years later, whenever Tommy saw a soldier in uniform, he felt a mixture of shame and respect. He remembered Sergeant Wilson's dignity and professionalism, and he wished he could take back those few seconds that had taught him the hardest lesson of his life. The Royal Guard had knocked him down with one punch. He had knocked some sense into a foolish young man who desperately needed to learn about respect, its consequences, and what it truly means to serve something greater than yourself.